All right, let's dive into some social media data today.
Okay.
We're going to be taking a look at how men and women in the U.S. use different platforms. And
Yep.
trust me, some of these findings you might be surprised by.
Absolutely.
So our main source for this deep dive is going to be a huge 2024 survey from the Pew Research Center.
Hmm?
They covered all the big names, YouTube, Facebook, TikTok,
Mm-hmm.
the whole gang.
Yep.
So are you ready to uncover some unexpected trends and maybe challenge a few assumptions about how we connect online?
Data on the screen, numbers come alive. Male, female flows where the patterns thrive. Visual charts, public colors unify. Gender decoded, bringing truth to light. Small drum fill. We break it down, real talk. Trends unveiling, facts from every block. Here's your insight, watch the data glide. Gender decoded, let the beats collide.
Before we get into the gender breakdown, let's quickly set the stage. No surprises here. YouTube and Facebook are still the giants, with about half of all U.S. adults using them. Instagram is also massively popular. But here's the thing. When you break it down by gender, the picture changes completely. What platform do you think has the biggest gender difference? Like, take a moment to actually guess, and then we'll see if you're right.
Oh, I'm willing to bet most people would be surprised by the answer.
I know I was. Ready to reveal the biggest gender divide in the social media landscape.
Let's start with the most extreme example, Pinterest. A whopping 74% of Pinterest users are women, compared to only 26% men. That's almost 3 women for every 1 man.
That's mind-blowing. I knew Pinterest skewed female, but I never would have guessed it was that dramatic. What's going on there? Is it just about those, like traditional feminine interests, like recipes and home decor, or is there something more to it?
That's the question, isn't it? On the surface, it seems to fit the stereotype. Pinterest is all about visual inspiration, creating those digital mood boards filled with, dreamy travel destinations, drool-worthy recipes, and DIY projects. But the bigger question is why? Why those interests tend to be labeled as feminine in the first place? Are platforms like Pinterest simply reflecting existing societal norms? Or are they actively reinforcing those divisions?
That's a really interesting point. It's like we're looking at a chicken and egg situation here. Which came first, the societal expectations or the platform's design?
Exactly. And it's worth considering how those expectations might shape our online experiences.
Okay, so Pinterest is the most female-dominated platform by a landslide. What's next on the spectrum?
Let's jump to the other end of the spectrum. The platform with the most pronounced male skew. X, formerly Twitter.
Ah, yes. The land of hot takes and breaking news.
Precisely. On X, 59% of users are men, compared to only 41% women. And this gap gets to the heart of some really interesting questions about online communication styles.
I can see that. X can be a very fast-paced, opinionated, and sometimes even confrontational environment. I wonder if those dynamics are somehow contributing to the gender difference.
It's certainly possible. X is all about those short, snappy updates, public debates, and engaging in real-time conversations, often on controversial topics. That style of communication might be more appealing or comfortable for certain groups.
It makes you wonder if women are finding other outlets for those types of conversations, maybe platforms where the tone is a bit different.
That's a great point. And it highlights how important it is to think about the culture of a platform, not just its content.
Okay, so we've got the two extremes. Pinterest, with its huge female dominance, and X, with its significant male skew. What about the platforms in between?
Well, there's a pretty interesting mix. For example, TikTok, often seen as the platform for younger generations, is still female-dominated, with 61% women to 39% men.
That's surprising. I always thought of TikTok as being pretty balanced in terms of gender. Why do you think it leans female?
It's likely due to the type of content that tends to go viral on TikTok. Think dance challenges, fashion hauls, and beauty tutorials. areas where female creators have a strong presence.
But it sounds like that's starting to change, right? I've noticed more and more male creators finding their niche on TikTok,
Yeah,
especially in areas like comedy, gaming, and fitness.
absolutely. The landscape is definitely shifting, and it'll be interesting to see how those changes impact the overall gender balance on TikTok in the coming years.
Definitely. Now, before we go any further, I have a confession to make. I'm a bit clueless about Reddit. I know it's popular, but I don't really get it. Can you break it down for me? And for our listener, in a way that makes sense.
Reddit is like a massive online universe made up of thousands of individual communities called subreddits. You could think of each subreddit as a dedicated forum for a specific topic, whether it's video games, cooking, or even obscure hobbies you never knew existed.
So it's like a choose-your-own-adventure for your interest.
Exactly. And what makes Reddit unique is its focus on in-depth discussions and passionate communities. People go there to geek out, share their knowledge, and connect with others who share their passions.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. Now, where does Reddit fall on the gender spectrum?
Reddit leans male, with 57% men to 43% women.
Why do you think that is? Is it the topics themselves, or is there something about the culture of Reddit that might be contributing to that gap?
It's likely a combination of factors. First, the early adopters of Reddit were heavily male and tech-savvy, which shaped the platform's overall culture. Second, while there are subreddits for pretty much everything, certain communities, especially those focused on gaming or tech, tend to be more male-dominated. And finally, there's a certain style of humor and communication on Reddit that can be, let's say, an acquired taste.
So it's not just the topics themselves, but also the way people interact and communicate within those communities.
Precisely. And that can create a certain atmosphere that might resonate more with some groups than others.
Okay, so we've covered Pinterest X, TikTok, and Reddit. What about the social media giants, Facebook and Instagram? Where do they stand in terms of gender balance?
Both Facebook and Instagram have a slight female skew, though the gap is much smaller than on platforms like Pinterest or X. Facebook is 57% female to 43% male, while Instagram is 57% female to 44% male.
I'm curious, why do you think both of those platforms lean slightly female, even though their content is so diverse?
It's a fascinating question. Both platforms place a heavy emphasis on visual content, sharing photos and videos, connecting with friends and family, and staying up to date on everyone's lives. That type of content and interaction might be more appealing to a female audience.
It's interesting to think about how these platforms might be subtly shaping the way we communicate and connect with each other online.
Absolutely. And it highlights the importance of being aware of these subtle dynamics and how they might be influencing our online experiences.
Okay, I think we've got a pretty good overview of the gender breakdown across the major social media platforms. What's really fascinating to me is that we've got this whole spectrum, from extreme female dominance to a near-perfect balance to significant male skew.
It's a complex landscape for sure, and what we've seen so far just scratches the surface. The real question is why? Why do these differences exist? It really is. And to answer that why, we have to look beyond the platforms themselves and consider the broader social and cultural factors at play.
All right, I'm ready to dive deeper. Hit me with the insights.
Let's start with something you mentioned earlier, platform culture. Every social media platform has its own unique vibe, its own unwritten rules of engagement, and its own sense of community. And those elements can be incredibly influential in shaping who gravitates towards each platform.
Can you give me an example?
Think about the difference between Instagram and Reddit. Instagram is all about presenting a polished, visually appealing version of yourself and your life. It's about those carefully curated photos, aspirational lifestyles, and connecting with people you might know in real life or admire from afar.
Okay, I see that. So it's less about deep discussions and more about creating a certain aesthetic or image.
Exactly. Reddit, on the other hand, thrives on anonymity and those niche interests. It's a place where you can geek out about your favorite hobbies, engage in passionate debates, and connect with people from all over the world who share your very specific passions. The focus is less on presentation and more on authentic engagement, even if it gets a little messy or controversial.
That makes sense. It's like two different communication styles. One is more visual and aspirational. The other is more text-based and community-driven.
Exactly. And those different styles can attract different demographics, which then further reinforces the culture of each platform.
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way.
Right. And we can't forget about historical context. The platforms that became popular first often set the tone for those that came later.
So the early adopters had a disproportionate influence on the overall culture of social media.
Absolutely. Think about Facebook. When it first launched, it was primarily a way for college students to connect with each other. That early focus on a relatively homogenous demographic shaped Facebook's initial culture and design.
I see what you mean. It's like the DNA of the platform was established in those early days.
Precisely. And as Facebook grew and evolved, it had to adapt to a much broader user base. But those early influences are still part of its DNA.
Okay, so we've talked about culture and historical context. What about the role of design? How does the way a platform is designed influence its gender dynamics?
Design is crucial. The way a platform looks, feels, and functions can have a huge impact on who feels welcome and comfortable in that space.
Give me an example of how design plays out in the real world.
Think about Pinterest again. Its entire interface is built around those visually appealing pins, curated boards, and the idea of creating a digital scrapbook of your interests. That design aesthetic is very much in line with what we traditionally associate with female interests and hobbies.
So the design itself is almost like a subtle form of marketing, targeting a specific audience.
You could say that. And it's not just about the visuals. The functionality of a platform also plays a role. Take Snapchat, for instance.
Yes, the land of disappearing messages and playful filters.
Exactly. Snapchat's core features are all about those quick ephemeral interactions, visual communication, and a sense of playfulness. Those elements tend to resonate more with a female audience.
But couldn't you argue that those privacy features might also be appealing to men who are concerned about their digital footprint?
That's a great point, and it highlights the fact that these aren't rigid categories. There's always overlap and nuance.
Right. It's not about saying that men never use Snapchat or that women aren't interested in Reddit. It's about understanding those broader trends and how they shape the overall landscape of social media.
Exactly. And one final factor we need to consider is marketing. How platforms present themselves to the world can have a huge impact on who feels seen and included.
Okay, so we're talking about branding advertising. And the overall messaging that a platform puts out there.
Precisely. Think about how Dove, a personal care brand, repositioned itself in the early 2000s. To appeal to women who are tired of unrealistic beauty standards.
I remember those ads. They were all about celebrating real women and body positivity. It was a huge shift from the traditional beauty advertising we were used to seeing.
Exactly. And that's a great example of how deliberate marketing can influence perceptions and create a stronger connection with a specific target audience.
So are you saying that social media platforms are doing the same thing, intentionally targeting certain demographics with their marketing?
Absolutely. They have to. In a crowded digital landscape, every platform is fighting for attention and users. And a key part of that battle is defining your brand identity and crafting a message that resonates with your ideal audience.
So it's not just about building a cool app. It's about strategically positioning that app in a way that attracts the right users.
Exactly. And that's where those subtle gender dynamics come into play.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating mix of cultural influences, historical context, design choices, and strategic marketing, all working together to shape who uses which platforms and how they experience those online spaces.
You got it.
Before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, let's do a quick recap for our listener, just to make sure we're all on the same page. All right, let's recap what we've learned so far.
Absolutely.
First, we discovered that social media usage is not gender neutral. There are some clear patterns in how men and women gravitate towards certain platforms.
We also talked about how those patterns are shaped by a fascinating mix of factors, including the culture of each platform, its historical context, the way it's designed, and even how it's marketed.
And perhaps most importantly, we realized that these categories aren't rigid. Most people use multiple platforms for different purposes, creating their own personal social media toolkits.
Exactly. It's all about finding the right tool for the right job.
So next time you're scrolling through your favorite app, take a moment to think about who else is in that online space with you. It might just change how you view the content you see.
It's all about being more aware of those subtle dynamics.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. But there's one more big question I want to explore. What do you think the future holds for these gender dynamics on social media? Will these gaps widen, shrink, or will we see something else entirely?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I honestly don't have a crystal ball.
Me neither. But it's fun to speculate.
It is. What are your thoughts?
Well, part of me thinks the lines might start to blur as platforms try to appeal to wider audiences. But then again, maybe we'll see new platforms emerge that cater to very specific niches, potentially leading to even stronger gender divides.
I could see that happening too. It'll be interesting to see if any new platforms can successfully bridge those divides, creating spaces that are truly inclusive and appealing to both men and women across a variety of interests.
Maybe we'll see a resurgence of those early online communities, where the focus was more on shared interests and less on demographics.
That would be a fascinating development.
It would, and it raises another interesting question. Will we see a shift away from those highly polished, curated versions of ourselves that dominate platforms like Instagram?
That's a great question. I think there's already a growing desire for more authenticity online, a move away from those picture-perfect feeds, and towards something that feels more real and relatable.
Maybe we'll see a rise in platforms that prioritize genuine connections and meaningful conversations over those fleeting viral moments.
It's certainly possible, and it would be a welcome change.
Okay, so the future of social media is still very much unwritten. But one thing's for sure, it's going to be a wild ride.
I completely agree.
Well, this has been an incredibly eye-opening deep dive. I know I've learned a ton about the hidden gender dynamics of social media. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure. It's always a joy to dive into these complex topics.
And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey. We've included a link to the full Pew Research Center study in the show notes, if you'd like to explore the data further.
It's definitely worth a read.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.